Dance into the music I'm imagining I can hear. Oh, for the record, I have like horny as fuck fan art right here that I'm gonna bring out at some point. We're all running on one brain cell today.
Just sudden cut out the music. Um, Hi, welcome Julian to episode 135 of the Best Games Period. It's awesome to have you here.
Thank you
Um,
for inviting me.
well, you were the one who suggested that we do an episode on one of my all-time faves, Fire Emblem Awakening. And I felt like it was a really good timing, just with Fire Emblem Three Houses being out and all of that jazz. So, but before we dive into all of that, like, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is this Julian fellow, and where do you come from? What's your deal?
Yeah. What's my damage? So I'm Julian Rizzo Smith. I'm a freelance writer from Australia. I kind of run with the brand of being a gay weeb disaster in the sense that I'm messy. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm gay, and I like Japanese pop culture, which kind of explains why we're talking about Fire Emblem. I guess it's all of that in one.
Right, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
have you been playing anything?
Right now, I've literally been playing Three Houses. I think I spent over the weekend like 20 hours and 2 days on it, and it's been a while that a game has gotten. I've become that obsessed with a game that I will dedicate so much time and just like don't realize I've spent 10 hours sitting there. You know.
Yeah, this game eats time, and I think that like I've played a hefty amount of Fire Emblem. I have missed a couple of the more recent releases, but I played a lot of the older ones, and the newer ones are definitely longer experiences. Um,
Yeah.
so I
I
feel
also
you.
feel like they're also because I Fire Emblem Awakening was my first Fire Emblem because I never I never got into the other ones just because the art style wasn't. It's not something I'm not interested in. It's just it didn't. I didn't gravitate towards it as much as Fire Emblem Awakening, which had this huge anime art style and aesthetic, and that's in testament to the character designer. I forgot his name. I viewed him a few years ago, but it's just that distinct anime look that I think sells a lot of people and brings them in at first, and then they spend like as you said, like 100+ hours. I think most people to finish the last game, Fates, it was like you had to play it 3 or 4 different times. So it was like 200 hours overall.
Yeah. Well, and you had to buy both. Like,
Yeah, you had to buy both, and then I think there was even like a third one if you had to get a collector's edition. It had like the no, that's right. Each one had two routes, and then you had to get both to get all three.
right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of the evolution of Fire Emblem has definitely been really interesting because I love the old ones, and like the leap to like 3D animation is something that I've always kind of bemoaned about the series because I like the charm of kind of the sprite work in the 2D ones, but yeah, these newer ones have definitely found a much wider audience and become like, oh, it's not just those two anime characters in Smash Brothers anymore. Now it's like they're widely recognized figures.
Yeah, and it's like if you go to, I think the easiest way to see this in the wild is just going to any like geek convention, and I can guarantee you will see Fire Emblem fan art. Like it is, especially in the Australian communities, like in Australian anime conventions, it exploded so much and is still even before Three Houses came out, like years after Awakening and years after Fates, you would still see like artwork of Chrome. And you don't see that much cosplayers. It's more fan art, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is because Fire Emblem Awakening. A reason why I think it's such a great game and why it should be deserved as something that is, and why it's in a conversation about the best games of all time, is because it's I think the most unapologetic game for fans and fandoms because it like leans so heavily into that shipping culture, and as you said, like that 3D anime aesthetic, animation aesthetic is also leaning into that of just like because this was the intelligent systems obviously like they thought this was going to be the last game, so they were
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, screw it, we'll do anything we can to appeal to the masses and bring in as many new fans and make sure we sell more than 250,000 right, and
Yeah.
they did 100%, but it's like they brought in all of these different ideas that are specific to anime fandoms, and the amalgamation I think is like such an incredible and like very unique experience. To me, I think it was my first like visual novel like game, which I know it's not a visual novel, but the support storylines kind of feel and play out like one.
Yeah. I can see where you'd make that comparison.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's just dominated fan art, and it's like you could tell the way it was made, like the character designs, the whole support mechanic, everything about it was made with the framework in mind of creating some form of culture and like long lasting universe for people to create stories in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you mentioned something a little bit earlier about shipping culture. So what exactly is shipping culture?
All right, so shipping culture is an idea. It's a very millennial concept that I believe originated during the Tumblr age in the noughties. So it's the idea that people will want to idealize two fictional characters into a relationship together. So I think it first started with Supernatural, and like the Sherlock fandoms are the most infamous ones in the Western media.
Mhm.
But you have that a lot in anime, especially in like shonen shows like Naruto, for instance. There was always when it was coming when Naruto was airing, there was this huge like fight between fans between like Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura, for instance. So like characters that they're 2D characters. They don't even really matter. They're not going to ever be in a relationship, but people
Whoa,
fight.
whoa, whoa! Did you just say Naruto
Uh,
doesn't matter?
I'm sorry. I love my son so much. Well, I guess he's my dad now because he's older than me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But exactly, like that's what I mean. Like people get so invested, right? They get so into these shipping these characters. Like I will die on this ship to say that Momo and Todoroki and My Hero Academia belong together, and that's wild because they're anime characters and they're also like 14 or 16 or something. But it's like there's just this innate desire to see these characters belong together and like see stories between them and share experiences through them. It's like a weird like you live vicariously through them.
Yeah.
And Fire Emblem is designed in almost every aspect around that. Like even when you're strategically like moving units around the battle, if you move them closer to each other to another unit, they will work together in a fight and defend each other and have a couple of sly comments here and there, like one like little comments that allude to certain things. And you'll boost their ranks and their relationships together just from that, and that's like such a small, minute detail that like if you're like a shipper, you just be like, oh yeah, it's cute. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess one of the things that you mentioned is that I guess there are a couple ways that Awakening really diverges from the old Fire Emblem games, which I wouldn't necessarily consider super hard to get into. Like it's by any means, it's not like the hardest of hardcore tactical franchises.
Oh no.
But it has always kind of set itself apart with this permadeath mechanic where if you lose a character on a map, you lose them forever. And Fire Emblem Awakening introduced this casual mode where even if you lose a character, they aren't gone forever. They come back for the next battle. And that was super controversial at the time when this game launched, which was back in 2013, I believe.
Yeah.
And so that definitely, well, that as well as the conversation mechanic, the support mechanic, because in older ones you could only have support conversations with like 5 times per character, and so it mattered a whole lot who they were paired with. You could only get up to max rank with one person, and in Fire Emblem Awakening, you can match everyone with everyone. Everyone can support and all of their support conversations. And
Yeah.
so like that like it ties into what you're saying. Like the goal of the developers, at least for the casual playthrough, was for everyone to be able to kind of get into it and make friends with these characters.
And I think for me, because I played that game, 2013 was when I was in year 11, which was like my second last year of high school, and I was going through like a bit of a, as every queer kid does, I was going through like an existential identity crisis and being bullied in school. So I found that like playing that game kind of was my escape
Mm-hmm.
because it was kind of weird. I would like romanticize characters together and have these weird bonds with characters and sort of feel like I belonged there, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of ironic given that Fire Emblem has such a messy relationship with same-sex relations and
Yeah.
representation.
Well, so
Um,
I was actually going to ask you about that. Like because for some reason in my head, I've always thought of Fire Emblem as kind of a queer franchise or a queer friendly franchise. But if you go back and actually look at a lot of the games, it's not. But the fandom that has kind of come up around it is like inserts that into the game and builds up that element. And I think that that has kind of drifted into the popular consciousness about this game.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly, and that goes back to the point about it being about shipping culture. I think the biggest thing about shipping culture in the internet is that it's mostly about finding queer aspects of characters. And in most cases, the two characters that are shipped together are characters that are either seen in pop culture as traditionally heterosexual, but they're being shipped with another male character or another
Mm-hmm.
female character. So most of those crack ships are uh, same sex relations and like male to male, women to women, they them. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's not heteronormative. And I
yeah.
think that's the weirdest thing about Fire Emblem is that I think it has such a strong queer and non-conforming fandom, especially with all the fan fiction and fan art that's created from it. But then you look at the game itself, and it's very trying. I think it's because it's just a Japanese game. The Japanese games aren't necessarily open to exploring ideas of sexuality, even though they'll have a lot of very queer alluded to characters or queer coded characters. I think even in I think it's Fate's the dancer, the main woman, and when she's dancing, there's a moment it just screams as like queer culture. It's just that sort of on the same note as Final Fantasy X 2's Yuna,
Hmm.
with just like 1,000 words and like the intro pop song. It feels very much like this isn't necessarily queer, but it's camp. I think that's like the easiest way to describe it. Fire Emblem has always felt to me, especially from Awakening onwards, it's always felt like semi like a mixture of campness and like anime. And anime has always in a way been the same notion. It's still always been like gay but not explicitly gay, and like queer except but not
Or
explicitly queer.
yeah, or if it is explicitly queer, a lot of the time it's made for straight consumption.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something I think is interesting about Fire Emblem because the queer relationships in that are very little and almost abysmal, but none of them feel like they're the same style as like BL or Yaoi, where it's like capitalizing or commercializing off homosexual identities. It's just not done well and not as thought out as like the straight relationships.
Yeah, I see Fire Emblem as a series that hews very closely to kind of like this neoliberal standard in culture in general, where like
Mhm.
I feel like the only reason that there is increasing presence of LGBT characters in Fire Emblem is because that is an increasing market demographic that they can't really ignore when it comes to this game. And so trying very little baby steps to find that sweet spot where, everyone is happy and everyone's going to buy this game. And in a lot of ways, that's really disappointing because obviously their biggest success was Fire Emblem Awakening, which was going like it, relative to the history of the series, a huge radical step
Yeah,
for the franchise. And they just haven't taken that in. They haven't taken that same step in like the social relationships that the game tackles, and they've left a lot of that work to be done by the fandom itself.
yeah, it's weird. It is an example of what I feel like games are trying to do now, where they're trying to let fans create content for them, but it did it in a way that wasn't explicit. It just didn't, as you said, it didn't give us the representation we wanted. So we tried to find it in within the game in our own way. And I think you're still finding that in Three Houses, just from like the way that Twitter and fandoms work. Like seeing, for instance, Manuela, who I'm pretty sure is just as straight. I don't think you can actually romance her as a woman.
I'm not sure. Oh no, I might have lost you. I might have lost you. Oh no. Oh, you're back.
Oh, okay. Well, I, I
so,
guess.
so we lost you at Manuela is straight.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So with Manuela, I'm pretty sure she's straight. I don't know if you can romance her as a woman, but I know that Twitter exploded and like made a lot of comments about how she's like a chaotic lesbian, and it's that sort of idea where this game isn't giving us the representation we want, so we're trying to find ways that it could be interpreted as representation and creating stories, as you said, within the game's universe. And I think that's something that at the time was almost unique to Fire Emblem for me growing up because I never really felt like playing something like Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy or other Japanese RPG style games. I never really felt that I had to find queer relationships because I felt, for instance, the queer coding of Sora and Riku, I always thought it was not just queer coding, I thought they were actually gay growing up. Or Final Fantasy Zell, I always thought growing up was queer. There's a bunch of other characters that I just gravitated towards.
Yeah.
But Fire Emblem, I felt they never. One thing that I remember growing up actually playing Fire Emblem, I think it might have been Fates. So I would have been in university or college at this point, and I remember the one gay romance in Fates. You could romance this character, and in Fates, the kids are inherited from the fathers. And I remembered I married my Robin. It's not Robin, it's Corn. I think yeah, Corn and Niles together. and then I was not able to have either of the two sons. And then at the end of the game, the end of the trailer, they showed the two dads playing with their sons, and it felt like almost a way of like punishing the player, of being like, "Oh, the characters do exist, but we're not going to give you the option to have them in your party."
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up with regards to Awakening because,
Mm.
like, essentially, I think this is maybe, like, I feel like this should be common knowledge, but I don't necessarily know that it is. But Japan doesn't have same sex marriage yet. And obviously, the marriage mechanic in Fire Emblem Awakening, it's made by a Japanese developer and primarily for a Japanese audience. And so when you have explicitly marriage as the vehicle for creating the children who are hugely important for the side stories in Fire Emblem Awakening and building up your team and all of that stuff, it forces the game to hew very closely to that hetero point of view. Like just inherently, that is the case because also there's a weird obsession with like birth and bloodlines in a lot of Fire Emblem games that is
Yeah.
kind of uncomfortable if you really get into it. Where like, oh, obviously you couldn't have two gay dads and like they couldn't have adopted someone in the future of Fire Emblem to send back in time, which is a thing in Fire Emblem Awakening. We should
Yeah,
probably talk about that at some point. But
yeah, it's a weird convoluted thing of like, oh, we're gonna have this weird plot device of bringing in characters, kids from the future, but also you can't have kids if you don't like. I know what you mean. There's a very easy way to solve that. You could even have a character dies in the future, and then it's like, oh no, their kid has no parents, so we took them in. You know, there's a very
right,
easy way of writing that stuff in.
or like I because there is kind of this point of view where marriage is super important in Japanese culture, and I was reading a couple pieces to prepare for this podcast, and I came across this piece by Paige Takia at Kalio. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. Kalio, Hawaii, which is a campus newspaper for the University of Hawaii, about the heteronormativity of Fire Emblem Awakening. And there's a quote in that. I really liked this piece, so please go check it out.
Yeah,
Either you're married or you die alone. Like, that's kind of the point of view that Fire Emblem Awakening takes towards its characters, and it's really unfortunate. Like, and not just for LGBT people, but women who are infertile, men who can't, like, are also infertile. Like, that's a thing that just naturally happens, but in Fire Emblem Awakening, it's all marriage and all baby making. Like the women make the babies, and it's
yeah, and
kind of
like
that underlying idea.
I'm not far in Three Houses yet to marry or have characters marry each other yet, but I'm hoping that because this feels like the first game where they've actually created it with the mindset of like the Western audience in mind, since it just feels like they've changed a few things here or there. Minus the same sex, but also they've given more options for, as far as farmers aware, there's more options for women over women uh, people and players. So that's better, but obviously the male over male is quite crap. But from my understanding, I think, I mean, there's a time skip, so I don't know. But so far, I can't. Anytime the characters are interacting and have support stuff pre-time skip, it's very wholesome, and it doesn't seem like it's about them getting together, like marrying.
Mm-hmm.
It's more just like how they are at school and their sort of dynamics, which feels a lot friendlier and a lot less enshrined in like traditional heteronormativity. I mean, that also is coming down to like another aspect of the fact that you play as like having the whole premise of Three Houses as like a school, a military school where you're training kids to fight for a war is also very like weirdly like imperialist Japan and like kind of reflects like old Japanese values
Mm-hmm.
that have kind of been like hidden away and like shied upon now.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. Fire Emblem is a very weird lens into Japanese culture, I think.
Yeah.
It, yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's also weird in that, and I think what people need to keep in mind when they look at games that are made by Japanese developers that are primarily like when that happens, those games are primarily for a Japanese audience. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people tend to forget that when the conversations about these games come up. Like, I see it a lot with Persona. A lot of people kind of misinterpreting or reading things into Persona that aren't necessarily there, or sometimes even like the reverse of like what the developers intended and what Japanese audiences take away from the games. And so I think that's just something we have to be careful of when we have discussions about what what these things reveal about Japanese culture. Um, like I don't really know where I'm going with this point, but like just in general, like it's good to be kind of like wary about reading too deeply if you don't have like personal experience in Japan or like
The
a
cultural
Japan.
understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that I think there's I definitely think that's the case with Persona. I think you're seeing that a little bit with Fire Emblem, but I think when it comes to the way that same-sex relations are treated, especially in the past, it does make sense why certain things are still the way that they were. Like for instance, in Fates with the lesbian character, I forgot her name. She in her relationship, she gets drugged.
Yep.
So and like it kind of alludes to like conversion therapy, but I understand that the way that Japan is, it wasn't intended to be conversion therapy. It's just the fact that she's uncomfortable and awkward, and it's like the way of subverting it. But it's so for those who don't know, she's this lesbian character. The one lesbian character in Fates, you romance her, and she is awkward. I think if you're a male Corin,
Yep.
you talk to her, and she's too awkward to talk to girls. So you give her this drug, or you drug her into swapping genders in her head. Like she sees men as women and women as men, so it's easy for her to talk to women. And it just a bit
Yeah. Yeah. And
not
like
great.
that's that's another thing that irks me about Fire Emblem Awakening is that it doesn't have portrayals of any LGBT people explicitly, but it does have portrayals of incest, and it does have portrayals of like weird age difference stuff when it comes to Naui, which is like one of my least favorite anime tropes of like,
Uh-huh.
oh, it's a 10,000-year-old dragon, but in the body of a girl who looks like she's 10.
And even
And
Lisa, like you can romance Lisa, I think, who is Crumb's sister, who looks I think she's in
yeah,
her teens, but she looks young. You can romance her with like I think Frederick or someone. Like someone who's like very
like twice her age. Mm,
yeah, it I think it seeps into again the fandom culture of like if you can think of someone ships it, and that's kind of Fire Emblem in a nutshell for a lot of it, especially in Awakening. That said though, the mechanic is great. Like building those relationships, even the platonic ones, are really good,
oh, it's
and I think
super
all
fun.
yeah, and all of those support storylines are like really well written and have really interesting like insights into characters, and it just to me, that was, I think, my favorite bit about it. That and having to restart every mission because someone's died.
Yeah.
Because classic mode destroyed me.
Well, and it's for me, it's a really nice change of pace because I love strategy games, but so often strategy games. I don't know why I'm having trouble enunciating today. often rely on like faceless soldiers, nameless battalions, like all of that stuff. But in Fire Emblem, everyone has a face, everyone has a story, and often people don't have people aren't one note. Like for a modern example from Three Houses, I love Bernadette a lot.
Uh-huh.
Like she's super socially awkward, but as you do these support conversations, you learn that, oh, she has a passion and talent for painting. She's an absurdly good writer. And also the reason she has this weird social anxiety disorder that causes her to panic is because she's undergone horrific abuse. And like, but that doesn't define her, you know, like.
Yeah.
And so I like that a lot of what Fire Emblem does is put like actual characters to the massive cast that it puts into its game.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree. I think there are so many characters from Three Houses because I'm playing Golden Deer because it's the best house. And the,
Maybe I would
yeah,
say second best, but that's me.
yeah. Look, as long as we all agree that Blue Lions is the bottom tier,
Oh,
because
100%.
the only one person I wanted to recruit from there is Dedue, and now that I found out you can't because he's Dimitri's second charge, I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, cool. I'll try to recruit everyone but you two, so you two could just go off in the sunset like a lot of this. But yeah, it's the same thing where I feel like it has a clear vision of who its characters are and what it wants to do with its characters, and I think that's in part for the writer, but also mostly due to like just this really great visual character design.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially in Awakening, I think my favorite thing is seeing the amalgamation of characters and their kids and like how different they are, but also how you can see there are specific parts of their costuming and outfit and personality that
Yeah,
are just drawn from it. It feels really organic. I don't know. I really like it.
yeah, it's really good. And I was going through like a lot of the critical responses and casual responses to Fire Emblem Awakening, and I came across like this Reddit review of just like somebody who played Fire Emblem and has since deleted their account, so I can't properly attribute it. But one of the quotes stood out to me, and it's, to me the story wasn't the actual plot itself, but the character conversations. Like that's kind of Fire Emblem in a nutshell. Because I know a lot of people, or Fire Emblem Awakening even specifically, because I know a lot of people enjoyed parts of the story, but found, I think a lot of people in particular found the second part of, like, if you divide it into three different parts, the second
Mhm.
part to be kind of the weakest part of the game, but overall the character interactions really buoy up everything else that's there. Um,
Yeah, I feel like yeah. Even in Fates' story is I think just in all of Fire Emblem, the best bit about it is the characters in the story. Like the characters drive the story. It's not really about the world.
mm-hmm.
It's even in Fates, which has these very distinct cultures of like a very like traditional like medieval fantasy or like country, and then another that's very like imperialist, like ancient Japan. Even then, I think the best part about them are the way that their characters are fleshed out and sort of feel and how you interact with them. Yeah, I think that quote, I think, is probably why it's become the most popular, one of the most popular things on Nintendo. Like give it prior to Awakening, I don't think it was as popular,
Oh,
and I
I
think
think
now,
barely anyone played it prior to
yeah,
Awakening.
and now it's sold. I think I read somewhere it's sold three times as much. Like Three Houses has sold three times as much as Awakening, and like just from that,
Yeah.
like it's on the same scale, I think, as, and this is crazy if you think about 10 years ago, that it's become on the same scale in a Nintendo franchise as like it used to be a Pikmin level of like kind
Yeah.
of niche and kind of like people knew who it was, but now it's eclipsed that and is now at like, dare I say, it's nearly as popular to general Nintendo fans as like Pokemon or Zelda, um, or like a franchise where like you will get a Switch and it's a staple thing you will buy. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it definitely taps, like you were talking about earlier, it taps into kind of that fandom element, which is like basically I guess the fandom element that we're talking about here is kind of like the precursor to social media integration that all of the big publishers are really trying to push right now. So like, you know, it's the organic version of that, you know. Um,
Yeah, they didn't drive the conversation really. Like they just gave, in a very metaphorical sense, they gave their audience the tools to drive their own social media campaign, which is why I think it's interesting that Three Houses, I feel like, is the first game. Because, yeah, Fates came out maybe, I want to say, 3, 4 years ago, but
yeah.
now Three Houses is the first game to come out during a era where everyone's pushing things on social media more, and social media's become more of like a dominant thing in our lives.
Hmm.
So that I've noticed the marketing campaign for this has been very like it's it knows what it is, and it's very like pushing the fact that you could that it's about the characters and who they are and all of their like complex layers and relationships
Hmm.
rather than the mechanics. I actually don't think, looking at trailers, I haven't seen that many trailers about the actual gameplay. It's more been about the story and the characters,
Yeah.
which I think says a lot about how Fire Emblem is. Because like previously, of course, there was like prior to Awakening, there was obviously still story there and characters like Ike and Moth and Roy and others. I'm only naming characters in Smash Bros. Clearly, but there were others I know.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I feel like the mechanics felt a lot more integral to the game, and I don't. As far as I'm aware, like I know they made Shadows of Valencia, I think it's called, as a remake,
Yeah. Well, there's
but that
Shadow Dragon, and then Echoes.
yeah, maybe it was Echoes.
Like
Oh, both of them,
I
both.
think there was Echoes, Shadow of something.
Yeah, that was on the 3DS, and I
Yeah.
think it kind of flopped mostly because it didn't. It was coming out in an era where Fire Emblem games had evolved and had changed and were more about like shipping characters together and that anime aesthetic, and it was a very much classic Fire Emblem game. And I think the fact that it didn't sell as much compared to the others just speaks to the fact that Fire Emblem now, the reason why it succeeds is because it really is just a game exclusively for shipping and exclusively about fandom culture. And I think it's the most, I know I keep harrowing this point, but I think it's the most unapologetic love letter to fandoms because it's just every layer in it, in its design, and like the way, like just the fact that we said before, like it's a game that was pushing social media before social media. I was pushing conventions of social media and like fantasizing characters and creating all that fan art before that became a thing. Like it was before there would be like a Nintendo Direct, and then within hours people would be sharing fan art. This was
Yeah.
in an era where Twitter was barely even that big of a thing.
Right. Well,
Which
so
is crazy.
I think what the fundamental like paradigm shift that we're kind of getting at with Fire Emblem Awakening is that the game put the characters first and foremost, which
Yeah,
and I think what you were saying right there is that previous Fire Emblems put the mechanics first and foremost, and Fire Emblem Awakening kind of broke the mold by allowing the mechanics to be broken, like its most
yeah,
fundamental mechanics to be broken. So no more permadeath if you don't want it. Um, you have plenty of time and plenty of optional battles to get your support conversations all the way up if you want. And so like you can make any pairing that you want. And the longer you play the game, the more invested you get into it, and the more you learn about these characters. And it feels very organic. It feels like a getting to know you process for all these characters. Um, and yeah, it just feels good.
yeah.
Um,
Even all the other supports, I feel like all of the support missions, even the ones that aren't about like your player character's relationship with them, you learn more about those characters. Like I feel
mhm.
like in Three Houses, there was a relationship. I think it was a support with like Hilda and someone. Oh no, it was Big Barra Boy. Forgot his name.
Oh,
Raphael. Yeah.
yes.
Uh, and it was a conversation between him and another character about how his parents died in like they were merchants and they died when he was young, and then he referenced that same story in a conversation with me, and it's like, oh, this is like building this character up and saying that like this is a moment in his life. It's not just specific to one character who's a relationship with one character.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that's part of him,
Right.
and it's like, but I learned more about that story from a interaction between him and a childhood friend, and it's like those sort of different relationships and layers. I think Three Houses, I mean, Awakening does this as well, where some of these characters have pre-existing relationships, so it plays off that in the support missions, and some of them have never worked together. And I think the support mechanic draws on that and plays with that idea in a way that it really does feel like they're like slices of like a vignette of like a visual novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, I totally agree that it's just so good.
Okay, so we should probably finally like get to
Yeah.
the story. So can you do your best to give like a synopsis of Fire Emblem Awakening?
Okay, so you are a powerful, mysterious person who I believe has amnesia, and you
Yep.
are discovered by a prince of the kingdom, Crom, his sister Lisa, and their knight Frederick, and then you find out you have some destiny, and you have like this sword, um, and then this dark mage, and then I think you go around the world, or go around the country, recruiting people to help fight against this evil.
Yeah.
Evil. It's a very basic story as I'm explaining it.
Well, so like that's kind of like the first arc cuz the kingdom is like getting invaded by a rival kingdom, and the arc kind of culminates in Crom's sister committing like suicide or sacrificing herself to kind of like prevent
Oh yeah.
like this war from happening. And then there's a time skip, and you find out that there's like this general on a different continent who wants to take over the world, and he might be able to do it. And so you get all your old war buddies together and like go and fight him. And that's kind of where a lot of people lost the thread of the game and like really didn't like what was happening, but it gets tied back in later. So you go and defeat this general who's named Walhart, and you find out that he was actually opposing the evil organization that wants to like resurrect the evil dragon that will destroy the world. And then the third part of the game revolves around like obviously ripping the band-aid off of why your character has amnesia, and it basically turns out that they're an avatar or they were created to be an avatar of this evil dragon god to destroy the world. And while all of this has been happening, characters from 10 years in the future have been like traveling backwards in time, and it's never really like super explained how this is happening, but it doesn't really matter. um like that's kind of the thing with this game. Like any plot holes, it's just kind of like, well, it doesn't really matter because that's not what the game is about. They travel back in time. That's how you meet all of your grown-up sons and daughters and whatnot. And the final act of the game reveals that not only have all of these people traveled back in time, but so has like the evil avatar of destruction, who is actually you from from like the future.
I don't even remember this.
Yeah. So like so the game opens with like a premonition of the main character avatar killing Crom, and then that scene plays out again during the third act, and it's basically your character has that premonition because the other, like the one from the future, the avatar from the future, came back in time. And so like you're not seeing the future, you're seeing what that character did because you have like this weird mental connection. And so you end up saving Crom, and but they end up resurrecting the dark dragon anyway, just not in a human form, in like a dragon form. So it's like flying around. and the final battle is basically on the dragon's back, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to sacrifice your avatar to like permanently kill the dragon, or let Crom hit the final blow and send it back to sleep for 1,000 years or something. But what I found really cool about that final conflict was that a lot of it draws on the bonds that you've made with all of your fellow characters. Like the in universe reason that your avatar character is able to kind of like do battle with this dragon is because they have made all of these strong connections and bonds, and you are like an extremely powerful avatar creature. Like, and that's really cool. Like I was just like, oh, this is kind of rad.
Yeah, it's like leads into like it's always like the story leads into it. The support mechanic as if it's like deeply enshrined in the actual story itself. I think
Exactly. Yeah.
it's also very anime. I think,
Yeah. Oh yeah,
and I
definitely.
think
Like I'm able to
right,
do this because my friends believe in me.
yeah, it's like so stupidly like based around that like power of friendship
But it's
dynamic.
so good.
Yeah, but that's why it works. Like, it's so like stupid and goofy in that like lovable like almost Saturday morning cartoon way.
Right. And so I would also suggest that anyone listening or watching check out a piece by Adam. I'm going to butcher this last name. I'm sorry, Adam. Adam Bierstedt. Uh, Bierstedt. However you say
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
on What a Terrible Fate, or with a terrible fate.com. But he wrote about kind of how this is a meta narrative and how it brings the not it's not specifically about the avatar, it's actually about the player, because the player is the defining difference between why the avatar in this timeline was able to save Crom and why the avatar in the future timeline was not. And so it's a really compelling case and a really interesting way to reframe it in a way where not just the avatar is like overcoming and like contributing to the narrative, but you, the actual player as a person in the real world, are having that tangible impact on the storyline by your connection with the avatar too. So
Yeah.
it's not just all the characters in the game and their connection to the avatar, it's also the player's connection. So it's like all I don't know, that's really cool to me. That's like a really cool storytelling thing to me. I get jazzed about stories in games, and that's a really cool way of incorporating all that stuff.
Yeah, it's very rad. It's that very like it's creating a personalized like impact without you actually doing much.
Right.
But yeah, I love that sort of thing where all of your like assumed decisions play out and like come together at the end of a game in that way. Yeah, it's. I feel like the story itself is quite cliched, but that moment at the end does sort of justify it because it's sort of all those layers of relationships you've built over the last like I want to say 60 to 70 hours. 'Cause it's a long game.
Yeah.
Um, kind of come to the top and just sort of like yeah, I feel like you don't see that a lot in games, even ones that are all about like player's choice.
Hmm.
Even stuff like even more like Western RPGs that have that like Fallout or um, it's another game that I forgot. It's not Fallout. Mass Effect is the only one that I can think of where
Skyrim.
like Skyrim, yeah, but Mass Effect is the only one I can think of where or Dragon Age. BioWare is in has that similar thing where all of these characters you've met come back and it's all about like how they all interact together and work together to defeat this great evil and but that's more about your relationships in general to them all. It's not about your personal connections with them.
Right.
Um, I feel like this specifically is like yeah, it is meta narrative. It's like looking at all of those relationships you had and all of the personal support dialogue you've had with all of them and how that's like powering you.
Yeah. Which, like, again, you said seems like it should be really cliche, but this game makes it such a fundamental mechanic to how everything works, and then brings it back around on that narrative level, that it actually like comes somehow like transcends the cliche a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's. I think personally part of that is just because also the anime aesthetic of it makes it like passable. Like it's like, oh, this makes sense because it's very anime inspired, so it doesn't surprise me that it has a very anime-ish styled like ending or like tones in the story. Yeah, I feel like you don't have that as much with Fire Emblem Fates. I realized I mixed the two endings, I think, together because I remember I thought in the end of Awakening you fight this, but I think this might be the general. This like evil old man who's got a crown, and you fight him on a ship or some sort of like sky ship.
That I mean, I mean, you're in the sky on the dragon, so maybe
Maybe
I don't know. I
I
never finished Fates, so I don't know if
uh,
that's what you're thinking of or not.
I know I finished the two individual campaigns, but I never finished the hardest one because I was like, I'm not going to play this game for a third time. I can't.
That's
I
too
think you get
much.
it's too much, and I think you start off with like only three of the characters, like the main character and his two maids, and I'm like, that's no, it's gonna get thrashed. But I feel like Awakening is like compared to Fates. I don't remember Fates doing that. Fates was all about the characters, and you were just sort of a bystander.
Yeah,
Whereas like a mysterious bystander. Whereas this, it sort of seems like it's about your place around them all, which yeah, it makes for a more personalized ending. And Three Houses is kind of doing that so far from where I'm up to. It's about like, I mean, Three Houses feels like a mixture of the two because it's all about like where these characters are all going to go, but also how you're going to influence them and like and how your interactions with them are going to define and shape their path.
yeah. I find Three Houses really interesting because it makes whereas in Awakening your player character is basically it is not the main character. Fire Emblem Three Houses makes you the main character in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
because you are their teacher, you are their mentor, and that's a really interesting change. And I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. I have a feeling like after a time skip or something, like that dynamic is going to shift back to kind of what Awakening was, but we'll see.
yeah, but I also feel like after having half of the game with that dynamic, it will also make it like it won't be exactly like Awakening where they're all equal. It'll be a weird sense of like they're equal, but also there's still a level of respect that is like a mentor sort of relationship. I do really like the way that Three Houses plays those relationships out. It is a bit. I'm a little bit worried about
Yeah,
about
same.
like right like because there's like I don't know. It's a bit sus and a bit like unethical to have relationships with your students, and I mean
Yeah,
there's a weird like I don't know if the ethical thing in this game is to only try to romance the professors. Um,
because
that there's enough there.
that doesn't seem right either.
No, that also seems dodged. Like I feel like the like you can't really go for any of them because everyone is either a teacher, like a colleague, a student, or is like 13 or in the soul of like a 10,000-year-old spirit,
Yep.
whatever. Like that girl who just hides in your room.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
Like
I
I don't know, maybe the dynamic changes once they're all yeah, I'm kind of like on this. I
yeah.
need to see how it plays out.
And also depends like how long the time skip is because I
Right.
don't know how long the time skip is, but I know I semi spoiled myself with like a accidentally seeing like a comparison of two characters, one like or a character before and after. I don't really know anything about her, so I'm like, oh, it's alright. I don't think I'm gonna actually recruit her, so that's fine. But she went from like a kid to like a proper adult. I'm like, how big is this time skip? Because if it's big enough that
Is it
intelligence
10
systems,
years?
yeah, if the intelligence system is literally just like, all right, we're just gonna make it so far, like this time skip so big that you won't ever have a conversation about is this ethical? I mean, it's been like 5 years since I've been your teacher.
It's still pretty
It's like
weird.
still weird.
But
Like
but
it's a bit
maybe
groomy.
but maybe 10 years? Like if there's just like a 10, I feel like that 10 or 15 years maybe you're getting into like period where it's like less of a problem.
Yeah, 15. But like 15 years by then, like that's a lot. Like the other professors probably won't be around by then. Like there are this amount of them that are like old.
I mean, maybe not Hanneman. The guy with the mustache, the crest professor.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, he won't be around. Or like Tomas. Tomas probably won't even like
Yeah, probably
last
not.
5 more. Yeah.
Probably not.
Anyway, it's getting like weirdly morbid, but I really do like the way that Fire Emblem plays with characters. I especially also like this isn't something that's specific to Fire Emblem Awakening. It's more specific to Fire Emblem. But like the classes are really interesting, and they're very
Mm-hmm.
like. I like the way that that weapon triangle works, of
Yeah.
like sword, axe, axe. No, yeah, sword, axe, axe, lance, lance, sword.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, I like the way that it just. I don't know. This like is a really cool mechanic, and also like adds to the personalized impact of your like how it feels very personal in creating these characters and having specific classes and like a design for them. Like when I saw, for instance, Mirabelle, I was like, okay, you are going to be paired off with Virion because you're both very aristocratic and very high class, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
very fun relationship. I also feel like you should be on a horse and be a healer. So then she was like a healer and a horse, and that works
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah.
And it's like you have personal, you each like every player I think in Fire Emblem has a specific way of how they want the character to be and how they feel their character is and their like classes and things, how they fight. And I think that brings it back to that idea of fandoms and like fan fiction because it's all about how you fantasize about these characters and what you see in them, and it's almost like a role play agency. And I think that's definitely something you see in Three Houses in that it kind of takes that role play aspect and makes that the actual protagonist's sort of character because
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
like right because the whole point is that you're supposed to be like training these kids like that's not just the mechanics, it's the story, at least for the first half.
Yeah, and I think this is where I kind of get a little bit um, torn about the casual and like the classic modes in Fire Emblem because I do feel like there is a lot lost if you play on casual mode because I guess a big part about Fire Emblem is warfare, and I guess it, as much as it sucks, like an ideal playthrough of Fire Emblem should it result in a few people dying, like not just in cutscenes, right? Because
Yeah,
war is terrible, right? And like that's
yeah,
something that the game repeatedly tries to emphasize in a lot of its storylines, and it kind of falls back on this. Well, we have to fight because like they're just pure evil. Like our adversaries are pure evil, and we have to fight because otherwise, we'll be destroyed. And I would love to see like especially now that we've gotten to three houses. Like I've always felt this way, but with three houses I can kind of like see maybe a path forward here. But I would love to see a possibility of like a non-violent playthrough of a Fire Emblem game. Like because you have now you have like the management sim element in
uh-huh.
like center to Fire Emblem in Three Houses, and like put a lot more emphasis on the social interactions because that's kind of where the game has been going anyway, and make it into like this like having to balance like a diplomatic tightrope, and if you fail, well then you have to fight, right? But having the first option be like diplomacy and like trying to talk it out, and like how you manage to walk that tightrope is also determined by how well you can manage like your location, whether it's a school or a country or like a hamlet or whatever.
Yeah, I totally think that could work. And you can also tie that into like stats like charisma or something.
Right.
Or like if you're in a faction where a specific character is from and you have a really strong relationship with them, like an S class support or something, it's like, oh, you have a higher chance of not having to fight them and sort of solving this through diplomacy. Yeah, I definitely think over the games it's gradually gotten more social and gradually gotten more I guess it's been less about the fighting. I was actually playing it recently.
Hmm.
I was played it over the weekend for 2 days, basically 2 days straight for 20 hours. And one of my housemates walked past, and he was like, "Wait, this game has like very little fighting," and it's just that pair.
It's a lot of running around the school in the new
Yeah, and
one.
I'm like, you're not wrong. Like a lot of what I was doing, and a lot of what you do in Three Houses in the month, is like micromanaging, as you said, and like going to different like supports and checking out, like seeing all these different relationships play out, and like doing all these dumb fetch quests around the city or the town, and it's very little fighting, and that's fine because the fighting's great, and I do genuinely still like Fire Emblem's battle system. It's
Oh
great.
yeah.
Yeah, but I do think that where it excels at is building those characters and that dialogue. I think there are few characters in Three Houses that have a bit of like an awkward delivery in some lines, but I think that might just be some of the characters, or I don't think it's necessarily the localization. Like Petra has this really, I don't understand. I have to like sometimes reread what she says because it's
I love
like
Petra so much.
she's very like, I guess it's like it makes sense that she's voiced by the woman who did the voice of Violet Evergarden, because she
Oh
definitely has that
really?
very like, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so she has that very like robotic, like robot trying to imitate human speech and mannerisms sort of dialect in
Yeah.
how she talks, which is great. Like it makes sense, and I'm sure if I understand who she is and get to know her as a character, it will make sense, and I'll fall in love with her. Um, and she does look very cool. Like in the three battle that I had, where I fought the other two houses, it was like she was the one who stood the most. Like she survived the most in that house, in that battle. That was cool.
Yeah.
But I digress. I think that there's a very interesting. Forgot my train of thought. Yeah. Battle systems are still really good, Fire Emblem, but I do agree that it's not the like it's gradually become less and less the biggest point of the game and like the selling point. I
Well, like
think,
the biggest gripe for me is not even like mechanically, because like what you said is like it it feels good. It's really interesting and fun to play. But also, what gets me is they've essentially built a war game where every single it's not just like Fire Emblem Three Houses, but like almost every single Fire Emblem game is about like characters who don't want war, but
yeah,
them not wanting war isn't like I don't know. I find it frustrating that there's just like no attempt at portraying like a peaceful dynamic, I guess, in this. And again, I know it's a long running war series, so maybe this is just like a weird complaint of mine, but I don't like that the mechanics of their game fly in the face of like the goals of the characters, I guess.
yeah, it's very contradictory.
Right. Like
Yeah, I
we're
guess.
gonna we're gonna make a game where like characters soliloquize about peace, but also you're like few meaningful interactions with other like political entities or factions. It's gonna be murdering them.
Yeah, I think again, like we're speaking about Three Houses in a very like potential, in a way that talks about the potential of it because we're not that far into it.
Right.
But I think the way that the slight story threads that started like beats in the first like 10 hours of Three Houses, there's like a specific quest that I noted that kind of hinted at war is bad, and I feel like Fire Emblem has this weird dichotomy of trying to show that war is bad and these kids don't want to fight, as you said, with the like by contrasting it with actual fighting. And I think that's supposed to, in a way, I feel like it's gradually trying to like represent both, but also like show a mirror to their faces. But it doesn't do that as like explicitly, so it does come across as a bit like clumsy. Not a clumsy like it's not bad. It
No.
just it just doesn't feel very streamlined, I guess, in that sense of like if it's a story about kids who don't want to fight but realize they have to because it's what they have to do because of shitty circumstances, but maybe give them an attempt to, I guess that's what the talk function is in battle, but you don't really get to use that often. Like if there's a bandit, you
Right.
can't be like, hey, maybe leave so I don't kill you.
Or like you would think like if it's a bandit, like maybe you could.
Like give them money or
Yeah,
something. Like
exactly.
bribe them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there are. I mean, this comes back to your point before about if we could, like, if there was some form of like, if you could negotiate with factions and negotiate with enemies, and use oh my god, I forgot the word. So it's with a D.
Diplomacy?
Yeah, diplomacy. I don't know why I forgot that word. If you use like diplomacy and diplomatic tactics rather than military tactics, I think that would definitely open up the game. I think that's the next thing that Fire Emblem can really do to make the next game, because obviously they'll make another game now that
Yeah.
Three Houses I think has sold the most
Oh
of the
yeah.
franchise.
100%. Yeah. Oh, and
Yeah.
they're gonna release so much DLC for this game.
Oh, absolutely. And I will buy every single one. I don't buy
Mm-hmm.
DLC, but I'll buy every single thing. I'll even buy like the like crappy Anna DLC that's gonna come out where it's literally just like you fight a bunch of people and then you get Anna. I'm
Yep.
like, I'll do it. I love
Yep.
her. She's great.
Yep. I like it just opens up so many possibilities of like, hey, you know that weird, ugly, and aggressive bandit character? Maybe you can actually like end up recruiting him and
And maybe
maybe.
he's not so evil.
Right, exactly. That's one of the things that has bugged me about Fire Emblem is so much of like I love the character design in general, but a lot of the character design for the villains really goes hard on making them like they're ugly evil, like or like evil ugly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's like very few characters, like the few that you can recruit in those battles are usually ones that are running away from those enemies. They're not
Mm-hmm.
usually like if there's a character that's recruitable, that's an enemy, you can tell just by the fact they look way more like your party than the people surrounding them. And
Right.
it's like it's too on the nose. I know what you mean. It would also be cool to even be able to like even if you can't recruit someone, like a bandit for instance, if you can negotiate with them and try to have a conversation, and if they shoot it down and are like, I'm going to attack you instead, it's still that level of like having that choice would make it a bit more
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, I do agree the bandits are all like especially Three Houses right now. It's I feel like I'm mostly been fighting. Uh, agree.
Okay, so the Guinness Book of World Records currently recognizes Fire Emblem Awakening as the most critically acclaimed handheld strategy game of all time. So I want you to make the case for like why that is and why it's one of the best games. Period. One of the best games of
Okay.
all time.
Well, I think it's. Whoa. All right. I think it's the most critically acclaimed
Hand
handheld game.
handheld strategy game.
Handheld strategy. Well, okay. I think that comes down to the fact that it, as we said, like as we've been talking in the last hour, it has all of these layers that make all of these individual units more personal to you, and from there, the classic mechanic. So obviously, there's the casual version, but the classic mechanic. There are all these different, like all, the way that Fire Emblem is made and works. It is based around two different ideologies: strategy and fandoms, right? And it combines those two in a really organic, streamlined way by making you care about all of these characters and have all of these intimate relationships with them, and then putting them on the battlefield and with these interesting little like strategic elements. And from there, if they die, it matters more because you've built these relationships with them and they've become really interesting people that you've learned to care about.
Yeah.
Why I think it should be considered the best, like on a best game of all time sort of like list, or
Yeah.
potentially the best game of all time, is purely because, as I said, it is the most unapologetic game based around fandoms, and the way that it's influenced fandom culture, especially in like convention scene, is something that I don't think I've ever seen before. Like I think Persona is the closest thing in Smash Bros, but those already had fandoms. Well, Smash Bros already had fandoms by being based around all these different cultures and all these different
Right.
franchises, mascots, right? Whereas Fire Emblem made characters and made a cast specifically to create a shared universe and like make memorable characters. I don't think I've really like played a game in a while that I've come across fan art, even just like anywhere, even on Instagram or Twitter, like 6 years later, or like frequently. Um, It also, because I would like to bring this up, as a teenager, has influenced me to.
Oh
So this is an
boy.
example. Here we go. This is an example of the kind of fan art that Fire Emblem. So Fire Emblem fan art is either very wholesome and about like relationships, like very intimate, or it's
Oh
just,
my.
or it's like this. Now, as you can see from, I'm
Mhm.
not really, I'm gonna I can't hold back and stay true to it.
Of
So
course, Gaius is on it.
of course, Gaius is on it, but Gaius isn't even the best. The best to me, of course, is my sweet boy Chrome, and also Frederick. I love them both. But the fact that they're characters that, like, Frederick has very little personality in a way in like his character, but the way that he's designed, like, all the way that these characters are designed, they tell a lot about them, even if they might seem very one note.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I just think it works really, really well, and this game would not be in the Guinness World Records for the most critically acclaimed mobile strategy game, or be considered as the best game of all time if it wasn't for the characters and the way that intelligent systems have weaved that together with like organic storytelling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So one last question, because we kind of got into like hypotheticals. What could like what could the next Fire Emblem, like whatever comes after Three Houses, do to like kind of escape its heteronormative roots?
Ooh. I mean, this would never happen, but have a queer person help make it. Uh,
Yeah, new blood.
yeah, New Blood. I think the character design is fine, because I mean, the thing about Fire Emblem is it does have some horny character design, but it's not based around fetishizing female characters. Because if you look at like they're class specific. Because in Three Houses, Raphael has there's a brawler mode of I think it's only for men. There's a brawler class which is like the sort of brutal like fisticuff one, and it's like a very gladiator sort of look, and they have very little clothing, and it's like that's sexualized. And then there's like the female dancer, which is also sexualized. So I think Fire Emblem does it in a way where it tries to sexualize everyone, which is something you don't really see in JRPGs.
Right.
Um, but that I think is already helping pushing it to be a bit less heteronormative. But I think to do that more, you need to have more male objectification, if that makes sense. I think
Yeah.
I think if you balance it out a bit, um, and in doing so, you'd make it more friendly and queer friendly, and also just having having more queer characters, but also having queer characters treated in exactly the same way as the straight characters are in straight relationships. Like the amount of times I genuinely don't know who I'm gonna romance in this game, because the only option for a gay male to romance a character in this is just I don't find him interesting.
Right.
And it's like the fact how in this game there is so many interesting, lovable characters that I've already fallen in love with in the first 20 hours, but when it comes to the decision of who I will want to marry, I only get to choose one. Like, sucks so much.
Right.
And I think if they just gave more variety for us, I don't think I would have any other complaints.
Yeah, the variety is a big one. I also really wish that they would do away with gendered class stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Just be and hey, maybe give us a non-binary character. That'd be pretty cool. Like,
It kind of astounds me that we don't have that. I mean, I know Fire Emblem's track record, but with what, at least 30 characters in this, you'd think that one, and a lot of them, like some of them are a little bit queer coded. Like
yeah.
it would be so easily to make like what's the name? Lorenz, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
non-binary, or
Yeah, Bernadetta.
Benedetta, like they could easily be
Yeah.
non-binary. You know, it's really not that hard. I am a little bit worried though in how they would represent that, just because of their track record.
Yeah.
Um, which it kind of sucks that, because as I said, I played Fire Emblem Awakening when I was in high school and I was questioning who I was, and that and Persona were very like influential pieces of media for me, and it kind of sucks that I fell in love with these characters and it was my escape from bullying and questioning who I was, but I didn't actually I wasn't able to explore that in the game.
Right.
And I think if future games did that, and like someone, a younger person that's much like me played it, they would get a much different experience. And I don't know, it would just, I would feel more welcomed in this game, in this universe that is very clearly to my interests, but it just doesn't feel like it's for me. Also, it'd be great because I'd be able to be horny on main.
Yeah. I mean, the fan art you have was basically horny on main, right?
Oh, absolutely. But it's usually hidden away behind. I can.
Fair. Fair. Um well, is there anything else you kind of want to like add at the end of
I
this?
think Fire Emblem. I mean, to bring it back to the whole conversation, the reason why I think we're talking about Fire Emblem Awakening instead of any other Fire Emblem games is because it did start off this trend of making a game for a fandom rather than making a game with the mindset of building a fandom and to celebrate the culture of fandoms instead of making a game and then fandoms falling into it.
Mhm.
Um, but I also think it's the game that has in the Fire Emblem franchise, it's the game that has the most distinct and recognizable characters.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah,
fair. Like people still like reference Tharja, for example.
yeah,
Or
Tharja. Like if you look at Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which is a criminally underrated game that needs to come to the Switch so I can play more of it.
agreed.
Uh, I think most of the Fire Emblem personas in that are from Awakening. I think there's Tharja, Crom, and Virion, whereas I think all the others are from like specific one other games.
Yeah.
And it's like that speaks to the fact that Awakening has such a unique cast and was such universally loved by fans that when Atlas and Intelligent Systems were making a game based around Fire Emblem characters, they chose three from that game French and that game. You know,
Yeah. I'm still looking for the equivalent of my favorite little kettlehead from Fire Emblem Awakening.
is that Donald?
Yeah.
Yeah, Oscar's not the same or whatever his name is. The new kid,
Yeah. No, he's
he's
not.
not. No,
um okay. Well, uh Julian, where can people find you online? Where can people find your work?
yeah, you can find you can find all of my hot shit takes on Twitter at Gayweeb Disaster, where I also generally tweet a lot about anime, video games, comics. I do videos for Kinnikunya Australia, comics and manga videos. I also write about video games and whatnot for a bunch of places. Um, yeah, I want to do a bunch of podcasts in the future. So if you follow me, you might get to hear them and hear Jack on.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was a super fun discussion and a great time to just kind of like gush and like really dig into like certainly one of my favorite games. Oh, sorry, we didn't do it. So officially, you think that this is one of the best games of all time?
Yes, I
Okay.
officially think Fire Emblem Awakening is one of the best games of all time.
Okay. Same. Uh, we'll throw up a poll when this episode goes up next week,
Mhm.
and we'll see what other people think.
I also would like to see what everyone's favorite Fire Emblem Awakening character is.
Ooh, that's gonna
I
start
feel like
some
it'd be a toss up
fights.
between Tharja. Oh, absolutely, but it's probably gonna be like Tharja or Virion. I mean, actually, not a lot of people like Virion. I love
Yeah,
Virion. I
definitely
think
wasn't
he's
my
great.
favorite, but he is great.
He's great. Also, Frederick is great, and Crom, and that woman. She's like from the other kingdom, and she's like a swords master.
Oh, Sayri,
I think she
Sairi.
comes with she comes with like this one other. Oh no, there's her. There's Long Q.
Yep,
Uh,
I love Long
uh,
Q.
Long Q's great. I think Olivia's great. I think Chelsea is a name. It's like a Wyvern rider with a C, although she died for me. Um, Henry's great. I love Henry. I
Yep.
could go on about like all of these characters.
Ah, yeah,
It's just
for sure. That's kind of why I didn't like dive into like the character stuff, just because we'd literally just be talking about how great everyone is.
oh, absolutely. And like all of their little like my favorite thing about the Virion and Maribel relationship is that they're kind of constantly trying to one up each other on like being more upper class,
Yeah.
and it's the most ridiculous. Like, oh, will I drink high class tea? Oh, will I have a horse? And it's like this stupid like it almost feels like something like out of like Pride and Prejudice or some sort of like Victorian era like bullshit. It's like great. I would love to be like a localizer in that game. That would be so much fun.
Oh, I bet they have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, I bet they also run into a lot of uncomfortable problems.
Yeah, I'm curious how they would like how they try to go about like handling that from a Western perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I know localization like took out some weird like massage stuff from Fire Emblem Fates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, it's anyway. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really fun having you on. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I would love to be on again in the future.
Heck yeah. Come on, be a friend of the show. And now I'm just going to give my ending spiel. So basically, hey, if you haven't heard of Extra Life, you should definitely check it out. It's a fantastic charity for sick and injured kids. And basically, people raise money by playing games to help kids in hospitals across North America. So it's really great. You can learn more over at extra-life.org. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow us over on at Best Games Period on Twitter. We also have a Patreon. If you enjoyed the show enough to like send us $1 a month, you get access to a bunch of unique episodes. And you can also donate more and get access to some of these live streams that are super special. We're gonna keep it open whenever we have guests though. So there's that. Coming up later this month, we have Tabletop Appreciation Weekend for Extra Life, so be sure to check that out. You can find this podcast on community.extra-life.org, as well as Spotify, Libsyn, iTunes, SoundCloud, all of the places. We are there. So please give us a subscribe and maybe a thumbs up or whatever. So Julian just froze in the best position.
Love this.
And with that, we will see you next time on the Flippity Dippity.
Bye.
Bye. And we're done.
Love Discord doing that right at the end.
That was amazing. That was like the perfect way for you to be frozen.
Was it like right as you like called back to me?
No, it was frozen on you like doing like a finger gun at the screen.
Yeah, because when you were like saving all these platforms, I was like Spotify, that one.
Yeah, it was perfect. But yeah, thank you so much for giving me like over an hour of your time.
Oh, good. It's only like 12:30 here, p.m.
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
So, all right. So I'll export this as a MP3.
Yeah, that would be great.
What episode was this?
Episode 135.
5.
I will send you a Dropbox link that you can put it in.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Because I want to do I think Ginny and I mentioned it in Discord. We want to do a podcast so we pitched this panel of PAX Australia.
Wait. Should I end the stream?
Oh. Yes.
Okay. We're ending the stream. Bye, everybody.